Welcome everyone, this is Oleks Osiyevskyy from Chasm School of Business, and in this mini lecture I would like to share with you some tips and tricks for effective management consulting. Of course, I have to acknowledge upfront that consulting requires a lot of experience, skills, proper attitude, but also I believe that there is a couple of quite simple but not easy, simple tools that will make you more effective management consultant. No matter at which stage right now you are. So this is a kind of simple but not easy things that I would like to share with you that I think will make you a much better management consultant. So, first things first, let's try to understand what is the role of consultant in modern management. And in order to understand it, it is convenient to look at this map that has two axes. One axis is degree of engagement with a company, which means how much you engage in day-to-day operations of the company. The second x-axis is number of companies that you can work with or that are affected by your efforts and by your actions. Of course, at the top left corner, we get a manager. Manager is engaged with only one company, and simply this person spends all his or her time on one particular company, but they are fully engaged with this company. And we have to understand most of the value is created in business by managers. Now we are getting to consultants. Consultants can effectively work with more than one company. So, for example, you can successfully run 2 or 3 consulting projects at the same time, maybe 5. If you're working with a lot of associates, you can run the whole portfolio of consulting projects at the same time. But of course, the degree of engagement with each particular company declines because you don't have as much time and you don't have as much experience of working with this particular company. Now, if we move further away from engagement with a company and more towards higher impact, we are getting management educators. So all the professors who teach MBA students, undergrad students, PhDs in business, they are here. They are really not that engaged anymore with each particular company, but by teaching future consultants and teaching future managers, their impact actually spans beyond a set of companies and goes towards hundreds of companies. And finally, at the very bottom right, we are getting thought leaders, all these business gurus who come out with new cool frameworks, ideas, methods, solutions. All these people usually don't work with each particular company anymore, but they write books, they write some presentations, they create videos that educators are using when teaching everyone else. So these thought leaders usually are not engaged in any way with any particular company, but they are affecting hundreds of companies or thousands of companies worldwide through their ideas. So, in this case, what is the role of consultant in today's management? And as a consultant, you can create value for your client organizations using 4 mechanisms. First, you can bring general management knowledge and skills. Even though managers usually would already have MBAs or some business education, usually as a consultant, you can bring the most recent ideas from management knowledge and skills. Also, if you are working with smaller organizations like non-profit, social enterprises, or small and medium enterprises, you might be surprised how much mess sometimes there is there. And by bringing just even a little bit of general management approaches, you can create a lot of value. So if you set for them the budgeting system, or if you help them with proper strategic planning, or with proper marketing planning, or if you establish the KPI system or balance scorecard, something that seems to be no-brainer for any MBA graduate, you might find that all of these things are not implemented and can create a lot of value for your particular client organization. Second thing, as a consultant, you bring best management practices or management best practices, which is similar to general management knowledge and skills. So there are particular tools that you can help your client to implement, and this will create value for your client. Third, Some consultants can bring in industry best practices. These are usually consultants that have huge experience in a particular industry, and later they retire from their organizations and they share the best practices among other industry participants. And finally, as a consultant, you can have this external perspective of the company. You don't have vested interest in this company. You can have this helicopter view, and you can notice that something is going wrong with the company or something is going right. Something that managers might not notice in their day-to-day operations. So again, as a consultant, you can create a lot of value using different mechanisms. These are those 4 different mechanisms. Now, a couple of tips and tricks about how to be an effective consultant. First and foremost, prepare before your first meeting with a client. So, for example, you have to do your homework in advance. You have to have as much as possible industry knowledge before you are talking to a client. If you are having your first meeting with a client who is working, for example, in insurance industry, and you are asking basic questions about insurance industry in your country, it means that you came without preparation. It means that you are spending the time of your client for explaining you the simple things. So, first, start with understanding the industry as much as possible. You have to move beyond the trivial knowledge, beyond the trivial things that you can read in Wikipedia, up to a level of reaching a saturation. My rule of thumb is that I really have to, before the first meeting with a potential consulting client, I would spend about a week studying sophisticated reports about the client's industry in order to fully understand its value chain, its problems, its dominant business models. Second, you have to devote particular attention to strategic group of the client, because most likely the client is not competing with all the players in the industry. The client is competing with only a couple of companies that comprise its strategic group. So make sure that you know everything, not just about the client organization, but also about its main rivals. Finally, even though you do all this homework in advance, you still have to be humble, and you still have to acknowledge that probably the client would still know their industry better, no matter how much you try. So never pretend that you know more than you do. Accept that the client's managers know their situation better, or might know their situation better. Your value is created differently. Your value is created through those 4 mechanisms that we discussed. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is a thing that is very widely used in marketing and in operations management studies. It is called the laddering technique. Laddering technique means try to get to the root cause of problems. Don't stop at symptoms. Don't stop at immediate problems that the client articulates to you. Keep on probing deeper in order to understand what is the essential root cause of major issues that your client has. Laddering technique is all about asking why questions 5 times or 6 times, but usually 5 is sufficient. So you keep on probing. The client, for example, tells you, well, if the client is educational institution and their enrollment in their MBA program goes down, you can ask a question, and this is the problem that the client wants you to address. And you can ask, so why is the enrollment going down? Well, apparently the students are going to another business school in another state. Why are they going there? Well, that business school charges them less but is higher in rankings. How does it happen? Or why do they charge the students less and have higher rankings? And keep on asking these why questions up until you realize that, for example, that particular business school has major government support that your business school does not have, and that's why it's hard for you to compete head to head with that business school. So keep on asking why questions 5 times in order to get to root cause. Don't stop at asking why questions only once. Tip number 3, and this is bread and butter of most successful consultants. This is called the theory of constraints thinking. Maybe you already heard about it, but probably not in the strategic consulting projects that I'm going to discuss. So, what's the whole idea of this theory of constraints? Let's imagine that we have a pipeline that is shown on this slide. This pipeline has 5 different segments, A, B, C, D, E. The throughput of the pipeline is obviously determined by its weakest link. On this picture, it is link number D, or link named D. So it basically means that investment in any other segment of the pipeline will not pay off in terms of increasing the throughput. You have to invest, you have to detect what the bottleneck is, and you have to invest all the money and efforts and time into removing the bottleneck. Okay, so why I'm talking about pipelines? It happens that absolute majority of systems, business systems, social systems, have these bottlenecks. And it is the bottleneck that constrains the system's development. So, as a consultant, by asking why questions 5 times, by looking at what's going on in the client's organization, you have to detect where the bottleneck is. And it does not make sense to have a consulting project around improving segment A, B, C, or E in my picture. You have to invest all your efforts into the bottleneck D. It is the only way to demonstrate value to your client and to create value to your client. So insight number 1, find those bottlenecks. How can we do that? Well, in operations management, in manufacturing, usually bottlenecks, you will have huge lines or queues, huge piles of raw materials in front of a particular bottleneck. Well, in strategy, it is a little bit trickier. So, for example, a company I have been working on, this was an engineering company. They had 2 essential functions, which was engineering, research and development, and they had marketing. And their marketing person has been totally busy, like 100% of time, the person was super busy. And their engineering people were occupied only 50% of the time. And the owner of this company thought that he should hire more engineers. And even though the bottleneck was obviously marketing. And as a part of my consulting project, I had to persuade the owner of the company to actually increase their marketing resources only once marketing person or marketing department is not fully occupied, and it is the engineers that become the bottleneck. Can you start hiring additional engineers? So, insight number 1, invest in bottlenecks. Find a bottleneck and resolve this bottleneck. If you have a short consulting project, 6 weeks, for example, you don't have the luxury of working not on the firm's bottlenecks. Now, let's proceed to insight number 2. Let's imagine that as a consultant, you found a way to eliminate this bottleneck D. What happens next? Well, that's obvious. Now there is another bottleneck. Now the bottleneck is segment B in this case. So, for example, you eliminated the bottleneck in marketing. You hired 1 more marketing person who helps the company. Now the company has a lot of orders. And now the bottleneck is production. They cannot produce enough in order to fulfill all these orders. So, as a consultant, if you continue working with a client, you will have to now proceed to segment B and eliminate this next bottleneck, which in simple language means there is always a problem to solve. Any company will have a bottleneck, and as a consultant, you have to find that bottleneck and then form your project around removing that bottleneck. Let's also talk about how most companies develop. So if you look at financial projections of most startups, you will get something that you see in the top left corner. This is the hockey stick growth projections, when at first we are growing quite slowly up until we start major linear or maybe even exponential growth. In practice, most startups, their growth trajectory looks more like the chart that you see at the right top corner, where the startup is growing and growing and growing until it flattens out. And this flattening out is caused by hitting a bottleneck that the management team cannot notice or cannot resolve. This bottleneck can be operations. So, for example, they cannot manufacture anymore and they have to build the new plant. This bottleneck can be marketing or market. They have saturated their own market, and without going to a new market, they cannot expand. This bottleneck can be finance. So in order to keep on growing, they need more money, and they simply cannot raise this money. So successful companies, they notice this bottleneck, or with the help of consultants, they notice this bottleneck. And the growth trajectory of real companies is shown at the bottom in the center. It is development from a bottleneck to a bottleneck. So for example, at first we don't have growth because our product is not developed. Once we develop our product, we have growth up until we hit the next bottleneck. For example, this is where we saturated the initial niche and we cannot expand anymore until we get out of initial niche. Once the founders or once the managers find the new market, find the new niche to expand to, they might hit the next bottleneck, which might be manufacturing. They cannot manufacture enough. Once they resolve this manufacturing bottleneck, they might hit the next bottleneck, which can be, for example, their product becomes obsolete and they cannot sell it anymore until they get the new version of the product, and so on. So, theory of constraints thinking. As a consultant, find a bottleneck and concentrate your efforts on the company's bottleneck. If you are having a preliminary interview with a client organization and they throw at you, we have this problem, and this problem, or we have this need and this need and this need. We need your help with marketing strategy and human resource strategy, and we need your help with developing KPIs for our vice presidents. You have to understand, you usually have limited time in order to show value and create value to the customer. Out of all these problems, by asking questions, why questions 5 times, by analyzing what's going on in the organization, you have to find the real bottleneck and then build a consulting project around this bottleneck. Tip number 4. How exactly to develop strategic recommendations. And this is where I have to get to good old SWOT analysis. For some reason, SWOT analysis is not considered cool anymore. It seems like it is something from 1970s. But it is actually a very powerful tool that remains relevant even today. The whole idea of SWOT analysis is that your strategy, organizational strategy, has to be based on the intersection of external opportunities for growth, for profit in the markets, matched by your internal strengths. So the whole idea of SWOT analysis is try to understand what kind of good trends are happening out there, and those trends are going to become your opportunities. So for example, if you are selling something and there is huge demand for this something that you are selling in China, this is the opportunity. However, if you have no connection to China, if you don't speak Mandarin, if you have absolutely no relationship to China, you simply don't have any strengths that you can leverage in order to get advantage of that opportunity. So if you have to develop a marketing strategy, or if you have to develop a human resource strategy or finance strategy or general strategy of the company, the strategy of the company has to be based on the intersection of opportunities out there matched by the strengths. If there is a strength that cannot be used in order to take advantage of an opportunity, this strength is irrelevant. Simultaneously, if there is an opportunity but there is no strength within an organization that allows to take advantage of that opportunity is irrelevant. So the whole idea of SWOT analysis is have very frank analysis of what are the strengths, what are the key things that your organization is the best in the world in. These are your strengths. Then have a frank analysis of opportunities out there, which good trends are happening out there, and then form the intersections of strengths and opportunities. How can our strengths help us to leverage these opportunities? These SO intersections, you might have 5 to 10 of those. Then aggregate them into higher order themes and you're getting your strategy. Now, what to do about strengths? If there are some major negative things happening out there, of course you cannot build your strategy around threats. But you can always have these ST intersections asking how our strengths can shield us from the threats in the external environment. So ST intersection is all about how our strengths can shield from threats. What to do with weaknesses? Weaknesses, you have to make sure that weaknesses are not sources of bottlenecks. So if there is a particular weakness, so for example, I don't speak French. I speak English, Russian, Ukrainian, but I don't speak French. Is it my weakness? Well, as long as it is not my bottleneck, as long as I don't live in France, for instance, or in Quebec, in Canada, it does not really matter that much. But if one day I decide to move to Quebec, for instance, I might need to learn French because it might become the source of my bottleneck. So, tip number 4, leverage organizational strengths and good old SWOT analysis. Tip number 5, mind the chasm. This is important tip for any type of new venturing, new product launch, or marketing strategy. The whole idea here comes from Moore's quite old book, which is still very relevant book, Crossing the Chasm. The whole idea here is the following. Every time you introduce on the market some new product or new service, particularly some radical innovation, you are going to see a lot of technology enthusiasts that will gladly give it a try simply because they are trying all new things. And also you might see some visionary first customers who are going to buy from you because for them your solution allows to resolve major problem that they have been struggling with. The problem is that these visionaries and technology enthusiasts, there is simply not enough of them. And if you do focus groups, if you do interviews of your potential customers, make sure that you are not working only with these visionaries and technology enthusiasts because they will give you a false understanding of what the market is, or out of 100 people that we interviewed, 99 said that we will definitely buy your product. The issue is that if you asked only visionaries and technology enthusiasts, this is not relevant. What is relevant is early majority, or particularly pragmatists. Most people whom you need are those pragmatists who do not buy new things for the sake of novelty, who have lots of other problems in their life, and your product is not going to alleviate their major problems. For pragmatists, you have to deliver a robust, a reliable solution that is cheaper than competitors' solutions. Visionaries and technology enthusiasts can tolerate mistakes, can tolerate growing pains of your company. They can understand that early products can have issues. But pragmatists cannot tolerate it. They want to make sure that they are buying product that is reliable, stable, that is going to be industry standard. So, mind the chasm. A lot of great companies died because they targeted only visionaries and technology enthusiasts. If your client is launching a new product or a new service, make sure that this product or service is appealing to pragmatists. In entrepreneurship, we know that one of the main parameters that shows whether startup will be a success or not is the so-called cost of customer acquisition, CCA. Cost of customer acquisition is how much it costs you to acquire a customer. So how much do you have to pay Facebook or Google for a traffic, or how much commission do you have to pay to salespeople, and so on. So cost of customer acquisition initially is quite high because you are still learning your market, but with time it will go down up until it will start growing. And every time you do any financial projections and you have some ideas about how the new product will get to the market, you have to take into account this cost of customer acquisition. And do not assume that cost of customer acquisition will always go down. For most products, the cost of customer acquisition will start going up because you will have to get to pragmatists, you will have to get to majority, whom you will have to educate that they have a problem that your product is solving. And in order to get to those people, you will have to invest more and more in marketing and promotion. Tip number 5. Tip number 6 is that any physical and any social system has the ultimate trade-offs. You cannot have everything at once. This chart is my favorite chart that shows the maximum human speed at different distances. So these are professional runners that were running marathons or shorter distances or longer distances. So on x-axis, we have this distance that the runners were running. On y-distance, we have the speed of the runners, which are world record. And what we ultimately see, the longer the distance is, the shorter the average speed is. Which basically means you cannot run long and fast simultaneously. As a company, you have to know, well, this is typical thing, are you a differentiator or low coster? You really cannot be simultaneously the best differentiator in the world and the best low coster in the world. You have to make the decision whom you're going to be. So there are ultimate trade-offs that cannot be eliminated. Keep them in mind.